So we said making a vow. So the author, rahimahullah, and we're going to start with the metin. The author, rahimahullah, he said, making a vow. The vow to do, he stated, something permissible or an act of obedience must be fulfilled when made contingent upon the occurrence of something, like for one to say, if Allah cures my sick one, then for the sake of Allah upon me is a prayer, or a fast, or a charity. So this, when we say a vow, this is what we're using to refer to an-nadhr. So an-nadhr is a type of statement that the Muslim, they say that statement, and a matter that is already rewardable but not already an obligation becomes incumbent upon that person, depending on the conditions of his statement. So for example, it is highly recommended for the Muslim to fast every Monday and Thursday. It's highly recommended. It's one of those emphasized sunnah. And so if someone, they did the vow, they made the nadhr in the proper way, and he's saying a specific statement, they made the nadhr that they make it incumbent upon themselves to fast every Monday. So now, instead of the fasting of Monday being recommended, and meaning he gets reward for doing it, and he would not be sinful for leaving it out. Now, because he made the vow, and using that specific wording, now it becomes incumbent upon him. And what does that mean? That means that now, if he leaves it out, and without an excuse, he is sinful. And so it becomes obligatory. This is called an-nadhr. And now we're mentioning the conditions and the things that have to be done in order for the nadhr to be valid. What the statement that has to be said, and about what things it is said. So it says, obligatory upon him is whatever applies to the name of that deed. There is no vow for a sin, like for one to say, if I kill so-and-so, then for the sake of Allah I will do such and such. Fulfilling the vow is not obligatory for leaving out something permissible, like to say, I will not eat meat, or I will not drink milk, or the like. Now for the explanation. The definition of a religious vow, nadhr, is to commit oneself to a good deed, which is not a personal obligation on the person who makes the vow. This means to make it a must upon oneself to do this matter, which is not a personal obligation, fardu ayn. Verse 29 of Surah Al-Hajj contains the order to fulfill the valid vow. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned in a hadith narrated by Al-Bukhari what means that the one who makes a vow to do an act of obedience to Allah, let him do that. And the one who makes a vow to commit a sin, let him not do that. The vow has three integrals. Number one, the person making the vow. There are conditions for the one who makes the vow. These are for this person to be, number one, to be a Muslim. If a blasphemer makes a vow, his vow is invalid. To be pubescent. It is not valid from a non-pubescent to make a vow that involves giving some of his belongings, because he is not entitled to manage his belongings. So, in order for the vow to be valid, the person who's making the vow has to satisfy these conditions. Number one, to be Muslim, so it wouldn't be valid from a non-Muslim. Number two, to be pubescent, so it would not be valid from a Muslim who has yet to reach pubescence. Because in the Shafi'i school, the prepubescent person, they don't have the ability, or religiously, they don't have the ability to transact. So they have to, in order to transact, in order to do the valid contracts, in the Shafi'i school, the person has to be pubescent. They cannot be prepubescent. Number three is to be sane. So the person who is insane cannot have a valid vow. Number four, to say the statement. So there's a statement that needs to be said in order for it to be called a vow, and in order for it to be a valid vow. It's not enough to, let's say it in your heart. Number five, to have the intention of that you're doing this vow, not to be forced to make the vow. The person who is forced or threatened to make a vow, his vow is invalid. So if the person, let's say, gets held at gunpoint, and the person that's holding them at gunpoint, they tell him, make a vow that you will do such and such, and he gives such and such charity, for example, because they want to ensure that that person does that, what he claims that he's going to do. In this case, the vow would be invalid. The vow would not be valid. Yes. No. I have to say it out loud. Yeah, yeah. And they have to pronounce it. Number 7, for one to be entitled to carry out the vow that one makes. So the person whom the judge restricted his management of his belongings, called in the books of the Shafi'i school of law the mahjur, basically someone who the Muslim judge has frozen his assets. He's not allowed to transact. If he makes a vow to donate, for example, a part of these belongings, in this case, this vow is not valid because he is not allowed to manage his belongings. He is religiously restricted from managing his belongings. Number 2, so the first integral, like we said, the first component of the valid vow is the person making the vow. That person making the vow, he has to fulfill certain conditions in order for it to be valid. Among them, and we mentioned these 7. Now for the second component, which is the subject of the vow, the thing that they're making a vow about. And then the third component, the third integral, is the statement. It must be a statement that clearly reflects a commitment. That is, a statement that means that the person makes it a must on himself to do such a matter. Abu Shuja''s statement to vow to do something permissible does not comply with the statements of other scholars within the Shafi'i school. It could be a slip of the pen from him. The apparent meaning of what he stated is that if someone makes the vow contingent upon the happening of a certain matter, and this vow pertains to doing or to stop doing something which is mubah, which will say neutral, meaning it is not an act of obedience, it is neither a rewardable matter nor a sinful matter, that it would be valid, and one would have to do the vow. However, in reality, it is not a valid vow, and one would not have to do it because it is not an act of obedience. Therefore, most likely, when Abu Shuja' was writing his book, he did not want to write the term permissible, mubah, but he had a slip of the pen and he wrote it, or it might have a different explanation that we are not aware of, because based on its apparent meaning, it contradicts what the scholars of the Shafi'i madhab said. So this is an example where you don't just blind follow what's in the book. If somebody came and told you that in the Shafi'i school it's not valid to do a vow about something that is mubah, neutral, that's not an act of obedience and it's not something that's forbidden or something that is disliked, and that person was teaching that this vow won't be valid, and then someone comes along and says, well, look, Abu Shuja' said it is permissible. We stand with the evidence and we don't stick our heads in the sand and ignore the evidence any over a person. Because even though the scholars of Islam, they have much respect and we are indebted to them, the students of knowledge are indebted to the scholars of Islam, and generally the scholars, they are highly praised in the Quran and in the Hadith, but still they're not infallible, they're not impeccable, and no Sunni Muslim denies that this is common amongst the scholars, the works of the scholars, when they might quote another scholar, or they might explain a book of a scholar, and they'll objectively mention that what this scholar said here is not correct. What this scholar said here, the proof is against it. Or what this scholar said here, it's not the proper thing, or it's not in line with the fundamentals of the religion. Different types of statements, that they basically are making the people aware that what that scholar said about that particular issue is not correct. And it is not grounds for attacking or ostracizing or saying that this scholar who said what another scholar said is wrong, that he is somehow outside of Ahlus Sunnah. Because the point is to stand with the evidence. The consideration or the point of the matter, the core of the matter, is not by how many people said a thing, rather, or by what is trending or what, like many people of a certain time have said. What matters is being accurate in the truth. What matters is hitting the truth. What matters is being upon the truth. So we don't look around and say, oh look, there's a lot of people that are saying this wrong thing, so I don't want to be, let's say, one of the few people that says the right thing, so I'm just going to join them. Na'udhu billah. In Islam, we don't have that. In Islam, we stand on what's correct, even if we're the only ones that are standing on what's correct. And we stand with the evidence, we stand with the proof. If the vow pertains to doing a specific act of obedience, which is not a personal obligation upon the person who makes the vow, then this vow is valid and must be fulfilled. An example is to make a vow to set one slave free, or to go and visit a sick person, or to accompany a funeral, that is, to walk with those carrying the body to the grave, or to recite a specific surah from the Qur'an. In all these examples, the vow is valid and must be fulfilled, because none of these matters is a personal obligation on the person who made the vow. If, however, one makes a vow to do an obligatory prayer, like to pray the Dhuhr prayer, such a vow is not valid, because it is a fardu ayn, a personal obligation on the person to pray that prayer. If one makes a vow to commit a sin, such a vow is not valid. Also, if one makes the vow to do something disliked, this vow is not valid. Abu Dawood narrated that the Prophet ﷺ said that a vow is not valid if it is not in an act of obedience. If a person makes a vow contingent on the happening of something, like for one to say, if I get cured or if I get back home safe, lillahi alayya, to pay such and such amount in charity, or to pray 10 rak'ah of optional prayers, or to fast 1 month of optional fasting, or the like, then if the matter which he made his vow contingent upon happens, then it is an obligation upon him to fulfill the vow, and he is rewarded for that. If one made the vow to pray an optional prayer without mentioning how many rak'ah, it is enough to pray 2 rak'ah to fulfill the vow. If one made a vow to fast without specifying a certain period, it is enough to fulfill the vow to fast 1 day. If one made a vow to give in charity, then it is enough for him to give in charity anything that has a monetary value to fulfill the vow, because he did not specify an amount. So when he leaves it unrestricted, for example, he says, the person says, lillahi alayya, to give charity. I make it incumbent upon myself, they say, I make it incumbent upon myself to give charity. So by them giving anything that has a monetary value in charity, and they have technically given charity, so the vow has been fulfilled. So this part about making the vow contingent on the happening of something, like let's say the person is and he really wants something to happen, or he really, let's say, wants his relative to get cured, or they really fear for their life and they want to make it back home safe. So they say, I make it incumbent upon myself to pay such and such amount in charity if I make it home safe, or if my relative gets cured, or if such and such good thing happens, or if such and such bad thing that they were afraid of occurring if it doesn't occur. So what did they say about this? If the matter which he made his vow contingent upon happens, then it is an obligation upon him to fulfill the vow, and he is rewarded for that, because still he made the vow, he said the words, even though he made it contingent upon the happening of something else. Even though he said, I'll do this thing, or I'll make this thing incumbent upon myself if this other thing happens. So even in that case, If the thing that he made it contingent upon happens, then he has to fulfill the vow. If the person does not make the vow contingent upon anything, one must also fulfill the vow. It is an obligation to fulfill the vow, and one will be rewarded for that. One does not have to fulfill it immediately, if one did not say anything that makes it obligatory to start immediately. So if the person made a vow, and they said, if my loved one gets cured, then I will fast 2 weeks in a row. So then time passes and their loved one gets cured. Now that thing that they made a vow about, then it becomes an obligation. But they don't have to, let's say, start fasting right away. So as long as they fulfill the vow before they die.